Thanks very much, Kheng Soon. I've been a long time follower and apprentice of Kheng Soon's in many sense, intellectually, in terms of policy discussion, and he's guided me in very many ways. As an intellectual, as an economist, political economist, even as an aesthetic on the art side, he's mentored me.
He's by the way also a fantastic artist. He's great papers.
Anyway, so he's opened my eyes to the deeper theoretical realities behind what I thought I knew. I'd like to share with you my reactions to his book as an economist. I was working in GIC for 25 years and 10 years as its chief economist, and got to see a lot of the rest of the world, the rest of economic policy, and was trained in evaluating critically all the economic policies that came before me, presented as investment opportunities by the rest of the world. So I had to be ended up reasonably critical about it. My reaction to Kheng Soon's work is I was, first of all, just fascinated by the entire range and complexity of his thought. But zooming in on the economic aspect of the thought, the part that most gripped me was his arguments for our return to our original stakeholder economy and to junk the foreign neoliberal ideology, unquote. I think, having looked long and hard at many economic regimes around the world and Singapore, I couldn't agree with this idea most. Let me explain to you what I think I understand by this, which maybe not be so apparent from just its titles and its jargon. Okay, to me, what is a stakeholder economy? What is, more importantly, a modern stakeholder economy today as we see it, as it's practicable in the world, as it's successful in the world? To me, the biggest example of a successful modern stakeholder economy is the economy of Germany. Okay, I say the economy of Germany because not many people know that Germany is probably the most successful and competitive, high value added, high tech exporter in the world, bar none. Okay, except of course, America is leading in a few narrow fields, high tech, but if you take the entire spectrum of manufacturing technology and all its high tech applications, there is no stronger, broader, deeper economy than Germany at the moment. And that includes China. It trumps China, trumps America. It is, in fact, as they used to say, über alles, right? So it has built itself up from this position since the end of the Second World War. Over the last 60 years, gradually by implementing a very, very serious system of stakeholder economy. Now, what to me is, first of all, the most general description of a stakeholder economy is an economy where both the government and, importantly, the corporate sector, the private companies of that country, work efficiently and together to create the best value for all its citizens within the country and all its customers of that country. Okay, so I would say that there are three important characteristics of a stakeholder economy. First, I'll start with the government sector, an intelligent state intervention in society, both in social policy intervention, but as equally importantly in industrial policy intervention. So the government is a key player in creating the environment for, conditions for perpetuating the success of the stakeholder economy in the way that it creates the conditions for optimal partnership with the corporate sector. Okay, so, hey guys, So the first important thing to notice is that it's not as a case where many neoliberal economists, including America today, argue that minimize government, get government out of the way. That is completely mistaken in my experience in looking at all these successful economies. And not just Germany, look at the whole of Scandinavia, you look at the Netherlands, look at the successful Northern European economies, including the successfully industrial part of Italy. All these countries share the same characteristic. The government, first of all, takes responsibility for orchestrating the rules of the game and supporting the corporate sector and society. All right. So intelligent intervention both in social and industrial policy. And then we come to the corporate sector itself, and this is where most people don't really understand what a real stakeholder economy involves. It's not just the government, which many of the neoliberals say, the government cannot create a successful socialist state because it's inefficient. No, the corporate sector itself is vitally important because it is extremely efficient. In the long run, even more efficient than the shareholder economy. Okay, and what does a company, a stakeholder-oriented company, look like? First and foremost, we must know what is most important for the company to maximize. What does the company really look to achieve as its mission and objectives? And this can be generalized. Most companies in Germany are like this, successful ones. First and foremost is the customer. It looks to give value to and take care of its customers. Secondly, it looks to take care of its staff and its business partners, including all its suppliers, including all its financial partners. It considers itself part of that community as well. Thirdly, it looks to benefit the community that it is located in. Most of the successful companies in Germany, and there are many of them, there are thousands of what you call the Mittelstand, the middle-sized companies up to 1,000 employees, are located not just in the big cities, but in all the various smaller states in the German Republic itself. And they have taken it upon themselves over generations to be the sponsors and benefit of their communities in education, in welfare, in culture, in sports. And they are looked up to by members of the community as providing employment and providing resources. And unlike the reception that, for example, Jeff Bezos will get if he walks down New York, these people are respected members of their communities. And they feel a deep duty and obligation to the communities to look after their welfare over generations. So that is another example of how the community is a key stakeholder for these companies. And finally, of course, there are the shareholders. They don't count for nothing, they are important, and they are not maximizing profits. They are maximizing the ability for the shareholders to continue to support the company in the long term. They're interested in the long-term survival of this enterprise that creates so much benefit to everybody. The survival of this enterprise, the sustainable survival, is their longest term goal. Okay, other characteristics are, given this, they don't hire and fire short term. You never see them cutting staff like Amazon does, short and long term, to balance the books for the next profits release for the next 2 quarters. They would rather close than do this sort of thing, right? They are looking for the long-term sustainability and therefore they invest in it, in technology, in their people, over the long term, over years. They're looking at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, okay? As a result, interestingly, you find relatively little income inequality in these companies. The ratio typically of the shop floor worker's wage to the CEO's wage in these companies is 50 to 80 times, compared to 200 to 400 times in an American shareholder-oriented company, typically listed companies, right? So you can see they have almost a tenth, of the inequality that you see in these companies. And this reflects their values. And this reassures their stakeholders that their stakeholders are the one that's important in the long run, not management. So this is the key of these companies. Compare this to a shareholder-oriented company, most of it you see listed on US, UK stock exchanges, and unfortunately increasingly so in Singapore, right? You see maximization of profits. You see sacrificing of employment short-term to boost up near-term profitability. You see often only short-term investments, not long-term investments, and you see extreme inequality between management and top management and shop floor, who are actually seen as expendable digits. So this, if you like, is the engine room of the economy, the two very different engine rooms that power the German economy and the US or the UK economy, right? And we are at a point where we have to decide in Singapore which ones we would like to model our economy after. Finally, one last difference is, of course, these companies engage in responsible collective bargaining practices with the government of the day. That means to say, they recognize that they collectively need to behave responsibly so that the country as a whole is competitive, and they maintain their long-term goals. So they cooperate actively with the authorities in this way. Okay. So they support and the champions of collective bargaining. They don't oppose unions. They see the strength in the unions as necessary to maintain their long-term survival, right? As opposed to, say, the anti-union kind of activities you see both in the US and UK. They want to diminish the power of the unions. They want to destroy the collective bargaining process. They are against any kind of unionization in their own companies because they will not be able to do their short-term profit maximizing practices. Would hinder them at an individual company level. So they cannot see beyond the individual company interests to the collective corporate interests. So the final point I would like to say is that, believe it or not, Singapore was once a stakeholder economy when the PAP government first came into power, and for its first 20 years, I would say, right up to, I would imagine, the mid-80s, Singapore was very much a stakeholder-oriented economy. There was strong, intelligent industrial policy. We did many things that nobody else dared to do. We created export-oriented industrialization. We pioneered institutions like GIC, like a new form of macroeconomic management in the MAS. We created the Jurong Town Corporation that out of a swamp created full employment. And so we did many things with intelligent state intervention. We actually bought up and owned as a government 80% of the land in Singapore. So this was effectively a huge land reform that gives the Singapore public as a whole ownership of the land in Singapore, something that many other capitalist countries could have never have done, right? Without a revolution. So also, if you look at our corporate sector then, and we gave rise to several very successful government-linked corporations that had a strong ethos of stakeholder orientation. So everything from DBS to SIA to Keppel to Sembawang to all those successful companies that at one time were masters of their field and very sustainable. And that, of course, includes NTUC income. Okay. So, people like Tan Kien and Tan Chee, they developed and pioneered and grew the company from a few $100 million to over $40 billion of net asset value. So these are, and with a very strong orientation towards serving the public, serving their stakeholders, not just serving their shareholders, but first and foremost, serving their policy owners, right? Insurance policy owners, health insurance policy owners, and I think Mr. Tan has remained faithful to that ethos to this day, and so both Mr. Tans, right? So this is an example of our heritage, as a stakeholder-oriented company, and a very successful one. This is the strongest, most successful period of growth that Singapore has ever seen, right? And people's welfare, livelihood and welfare increased tremendously. And this was in partnership with the government who upheld these values, both in terms of benefiting the people. This is when they created HDB, which is finest and remains the finest public housing system in the world today, bar none. Nothing in Scandinavia approaches this. Nothing anywhere else the rest of the world approaches this. Okay, so we created these institutions of public good, both in social policy and industrial policy, in a way that had never seen before. Why? Because these were the principles. These were the stakeholders we were committed to, both as a government and as a corporate sector. All those unsung heroes in the corporate sector. Tan Swee Chee, Tan Kien Lian,
Kien is here.
Oh, Kien is here.
Kien, please stand up.
Please give him a hand. George Bogas, all those Joe Pillay, all these heroes of our corporate sector doing their part in this way, right? How many of them remain? Look around you, look at Temasek today, right? Look where the companies are today, look at the share price today. Most of them continuous decline for 10 years, right? Look at their shift from essentially stakeholder to shareholder-oriented profit maximization, and see where that has got us. So we're at a point where we need to decide, are we going to follow this modern stakeholder-oriented economy? Are we going to model ourselves after a country, our own version of Germany, our own version of Switzerland, our own version of the Netherlands? Or are we going to follow the US economy to the political hell that it is in today, right? The farcical political hell that it finds, and social hell, and divided society, and impoverished bottom 50% of the population with very little financial hopes that it finds itself in today. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I just want to add a couple of points. First of all, about Germany. The German economy grew tremendously because people did not buy houses. They rented houses. That was a big difference. But in the last 20 years, it has drifted into ownership of housing. And once you own housing, your capital is locked into the property. Okay, so this is one big issue. The second point I want to highlight is about the how did the shareholder economy take root in Singapore. Okay, I have conjectured. I have no evidence, but I've spoken to people who were in Harvard University in 1968 when Lee Kuan Yew went and spent 3 months there. He spent a whole semester in Harvard. And that's where he made very good friends with Kissinger and quite a number of the top strategic thinkers in America. And he became, in my view, their man in Asia. Okay? Now, what is the implication of this? And in the book also I mentioned about the rise of neoliberalism, right? Through the influence of Milton Friedman, who is professor of economics at Chicago University. And Milton Friedman had tremendous influence over the Republican Party in America, right? And that is where the idea that minimum government, maximize freedom of investor, shareholder interest and so on began. I suspect that when Lee Kuan Yew came back from after 68, which is interesting because by the time he made a point, he made a speech that 1968, the PAP broke the back of the housing problem, okay? And that because 65 we left Malaysia, right? We had to become a global city because we have no more hinterland, right? Therefore, we have to be totally locked into the Euro-American economic order, which is the new liberal order, okay? So now this is the situation we are in. I think we need to think very deeply about how the land owning capability of the government, because unlike any other non-communist country, Singapore is the only non-communist country whose government owns 80% of all the land. Only Cuba, China, and a few of the, because of the socialist ideology, they confiscated the land, right? But in Singapore, the government is the only sort of free world democratic government that owns the majority of the land. And this is very crucial because once you own the land, it becomes a tremendous asset to gain profits into the state coffers, which is a good thing because it meant that you know the figures, right? The sovereign wealth fund of Singapore is in the trillions, right? But it has now left a legacy in which how are we going to transform from this shareholder economy, which has now engaged almost the entire population. 90% of Singaporeans own their HDB flat, which is the cost is an aggregate of the building cost plus the land cost. Building cost is 1/3, land cost is 2/3, right? So when you buy a flat for X thousands of dollars, right? 1/3 is building cost, 2/3 is the land cost, and the land cost you pay goes into the state coffers. And for young people, they have to spend the next 20 to 30 years of their life, affordably of course, but because they have to spend so much of their income to pay for the mortgage, they dare not try anything that is outside the box. They dare not innovate, they dare not try various things. The only chance, I think, for Singapore now is the SEZ Johor. And a lot of young people will have to go to Johor because that is the only free space left. Let's hope that it's not going to be taken over by real estate developers. Okay? It has to become an enterprise zone for young people to create. So these are the situations we are in, right? So I'm in the process of setting up a design research group with all the universities, NUS, SUTD, and Singapore Poly, the architectural schools, to form a design research group, right? To study what are the possibilities, suggest ideas. and also to collaborate with an equivalent Malaysian counterpart. So we learn from each other. And that is how we will begin to think about a possible future, right? Because the future in Singapore is locked into the financial model. It cannot get out. The government is locked into it, the private sector, the people are also locked into it. So this is a double trap. Over to you.